Months after the last meeting with my parents, I returned to the Lakeside district to see the project completed. The space had been transformed into a lively stretch of shops, walkways, and open areas filled with families and visitors. Sunlight danced off the water, reflecting against the new facades, and I couldn't help but notice how vibrant it felt. My parents' old shop stood in the midst of it all, now part of a design they had once dismissed as too modern or unnecessary. I walked along the boardwalk, observing the benches, the fountains, and the small plazas that I had envisioned and meticulously overseen. There was a subtle satisfaction in seeing the transformation, not because I wanted to humiliate anyone, but because I had created something lasting, something meaningful. Every corner reflected the care, patience, and dedication I had poured into the work, qualities my parents had never recognized in me. I paused near the area that used to be their property, taking in how the space had become a hub of life and movement. Children ran around, people laughed, and the designs I had fought to uphold were now celebrated by everyone who experienced them. For a moment, I let myself smile, not from malice, not from revenge in the traditional sense, but from the quiet realization that I had finally stepped into a place where my decisions carried weight and my efforts mattered. Their approval was no longer necessary. I didn't need them to validate my work or my worth. The peacefulness settled over me like a warm breeze. The life I had built, the respect I had earned, and the integrity I had maintained were my true triumphs. This was my revenge, not destruction, but the moment my parents coldly told me, "Your investment fund is gone." The market crashed. "You're on your own," I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. Everything I trusted, everything I thought I could rely on, van and fulfillment, proving that the only approval I needed had always been my own. As I dug deeper, the truth hit me like a punch I wasn't ready for. The market crash wasn't real. My parents had stolen my investment, moving it into failing ventures of their own while letting me believe I was ruined by chance. Every promise, every word they had ever said about supporting me felt like a lie crafted to trap me in trust. I felt my chest tighten with anger I had never known, a mix of hurt and disbelief that the people I loved most could do something so calculated. I replayed conversations in my mind, realizing how carefully they had manipulated me, keeping me blind to their actions. It wasn't just money, they had taken my confidence, my sense of security, my belief in family. I felt utterly alone, like a small boat stranded in a storm with no one to guide me. Even though I had once depended on them for guidance and protection, I now understood I had no one but myself. The betrayal didn't just sting, it ignited something inside me. A quiet, simmering fire that whispered I couldn't let this go. I had to find a way to take back what was mine, to prove that their deception wouldn't define my life. The isolation hurt, yes, but it also forced me to see my own strength. I realized that the anger I felt could be shaped into action, a tool to reclaim my life and make them face the consequences of their betrayal. In that moment, the seed of determination took root, and I knew I would never trust them the same way again. Money ran out faster than I expected. Rent, bills, and groceries became constant battles, and I found myself juggling every odd job I could find just to keep the lights on. Exhaustion settled into my bones, and some nights I fell asleep wondering if I was ever going to get ahead or if I was destined to flounder alone. The weight of being abandoned pressed down harder than anything I had felt before. One evening, while unloading boxes at a tiny warehouse, I ran into Tice Nolan, a former coworker from a brief stint at a marketing firm. He recognized me immediately and seemed genuinely impressed by how I managed despite everything. He didn't offer pity, only acknowledgement, which felt strangely comforting. Slowly, he became someone I could talk to, someone who reminded me that my determination still mattered even when circumstances tried to crush it. Despite his support, I couldn't ignore the nagging doubts. I asked myself repeatedly if I was capable of surviving on my own, if I had the strength to rebuild anything meaningful. Each morning, I forced myself out of bed, battling the embarrassment of my financial situation, trying to convince myself that I wasn't a failure. Nights were the hardest, lying alone in the dark, replaying how my parents had left me to fend for myself. Yet, in those moments of despair, a quiet determination began to grow. I couldn't rely on anyone else, but maybe, just maybe, I could prove to myself that I was enough. Tice's presence was a small lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't completely invisible, and that even in struggle, there was a way forward if I refused to give up. Late one night, while going through old documents I had secretly saved, I stumbled upon a hidden trail, offshore accounts, shell companies, and transactions that didn't make sense. It was clear my parents had been funneling money away for years, hiding their failures behind layers of secrecy. The realization was electric, a mix of outrage and clarity. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about justice, about proving that I wouldn't be their pawn. I began taking careful notes, tracing every irregularity, and mapping out exactly how I could turn their own greed against them. Each discovery fueled a methodical plan. I didn't want reckless revenge, I wanted something precise, something that would show them the consequences of underestimating me. My first move was small but deliberate. I anonymously sent a set of financial discrepancies to a few of my father's closest business partners. The information was enough to make them pause, whisper behind closed doors, and question Roderick's integrity. It wasn't public yet, but the ripples started quietly, subtly, exactly as I had hoped. Even as I watched the shock spread among their associates, a quiet thrill ran through me. It wasn't just revenge, it was empowerment. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt a sense of control. The seeds of something bigger were planted. Each careful step reminded me that I could turn betrayal into strategy, anger into action, and that the people who had tried to destroy me were suddenly vulnerable. I realized I had begun to shift the balance, and for the first time in months, I felt capable of reclaiming my life. By the second week after my first move, I noticed subtle changes in my parents' behavior. Roderick paced more than usual, phone calls became sharper, and Janice's polite smiles felt strained. They suspected someone was poking into their affairs, yet no matter how hard they searched, nothing led back to me. That invisible advantage gave me a sense of quiet satisfaction. I continued collecting records, tracing transfers, and documenting patterns of manipulation they had used for years. Each piece of evidence added weight to the story I was slowly building, proof not only of financial deceit but of the ways they had controlled and belittled me. It was exhausting work, but every document, every hidden detail I uncovered reinforced that I was finally acting on my own terms. To maintain focus and privacy, I rented a small, modest apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a space where I could work, plan, and breathe without intrusion. Decorating it simply, arranging my notes across the tiny kitchen table, I felt a sense of independence I had never experienced before. The apartment became a symbol of resilience, a quiet fortress where no one could manipulate or intimidate me. Even as I worked, I sensed the tension rising with every move I made. Their subtle paranoia reminded me that I had power, even if they didn't know it yet. Every late night of investigation, every cautious step to avoid detection, strengthened my determination. I realized that this conflict wasn't just about money or revenge, it was about proving that I could stand on my own, smarter and stronger than the people who had tried to destroy me. Sometimes, when the apartment was quiet, memories I had buried for years resurfaced. I remembered being 10, hearing my mother sigh over trivial mistakes I made in school, her disappointment cutting deeper than any punishment. I remembered Roderick praising my cousins for accomplishments I had worked harder to achieve, making me feel invisible, like nothing I did could ever satisfy them. Those moments weren't just hurtful, they shaped me, teaching me to doubt my own worth while they held all the power. I recalled being sent to endless piano lessons I didn't enjoy, not because they nurtured my talent, but because it looked good on the family image. Every compliment I sought from them came laced with criticism, every reward came with strings attached. I was learning early that love from them was conditional, a tool they used to keep me compliant. Those childhood lessons stayed with me, quietly eroding trust, teaching me how to read people, and unintentionally preparing me for the fight I would face now. The resentment I had pushed aside for years had been simmering quietly, and now it fueled a different kind of fire, one that demanded justice, one that refused to let their manipulation continue unchecked. Thinking back, I realized the person I was then, the hurt little girl, had never truly disappeared. She had been buried beneath survival and determination, but now she had a voice, and through every calculated move I made against my parents, that voice demanded acknowledgement, demanding they finally feel the consequences of the control they had exercised over me for so long. One rainy afternoon, I hesitated before knocking on a door I hadn't approached in years, my Aunt Cher's. We had drifted apart when I was a teenager, mostly because she had always questioned my parents' choices, and I had been too afraid to listen. She opened the door with a cautious smile, and in her eyes, I saw recognition, not judgment. Something in her expression told me I wasn't alone anymore. Over cups of steaming coffee, Shara shared stories I had never heard, about schemes my parents had pulled on business partners, relatives, and even friends. She described how Roderick had covered failed ventures with lies, and how Janice had manipulated situations to maintain appearances while taking advantage of others. Listening to her, I felt a mixture of shock and validation. Everything I had suspected was confirmed, and now I had insight I couldn't have uncovered on my own. Shara didn't just recount stories, she guided me, showing how to connect dots I had overlooked and how to turn information into leverage. She taught me patience, caution, and strategy, emphasizing that a well-planned approach would have a far greater impact than rash actions. For the first time, I had someone who understood both the personal betrayal and the practical steps I needed to take. Her presence felt like a lifeline, a rare bridge to knowledge and experience I had lacked. With her guidance, I began to see my path more clearly, the pieces falling into place. The fire I had been nurturing now had direction, sharpened by someone who had faced the same cunning firsthand. Shara became more than an aunt, she was a mentor, a strategist, and a quiet force helping me transform my anger into a precise plan for justice. With Shara's guidance, I started analyzing every facet of my parents' operations, looking for cracks they had overlooked. I noticed how Roderick relied heavily on borrowed trust from investors who rarely questioned him, and how Janice had inflated her social image while ignoring real accountability. Their arrogance, their shortcuts, and their overconfidence were weaknesses I could exploit if I acted carefully. I spent nights drafting plans, considering every possible outcome. I couldn't allow myself to become reckless, exposing them had to be precise, credible, and undeniable. Legal pathways became my allies. I researched regulations, tax laws, and corporate accountability, mapping a route that would hit them where it hurt most while keeping me protected. Each step required patience, careful timing, and restraint. Even as excitement surged, I struggled internally. Part of me wanted to lash out, to humiliate them publicly and let them feel the pain they had caused. But another part reminded me that true justice didn't need cruelty, it required integrity. I had to strike a balance, to ensure that while they faced consequences, I remained on the side of truth. The tension was constant, a tightrope between righteous anger and calculated action. Every piece of evidence I organized, every angle I examined, reinforced the reality that I had grown beyond the frightened girl who had once depended on them. For the first time, I felt empowered not just by revenge, but by the possibility of reclaiming independence, dignity, and control over a life they had tried to sabotage. The plan was set, now it was only a matter of execution. I waited for the right moment before sending the documents I had gathered to the proper authorities. I didn't attach a name, not even a hint, just clear, organized evidence pointing to the hidden accounts and suspicious movements of money. Once the report was submitted, there was no turning back. All I could do was watch from a distance as the first wave hit. It didn't take long. Within days, officials began asking questions my parents weren't prepared for. Roderick's confident tone shifted to something tight and uncertain, and Janice's carefully crafted poise slipped whenever she thought no one was looking. The people who once admired them now whispered, uneasy about what might be uncovered. Their polished world, built on control and appearances, started to crack in ways they couldn't ignore. Seeing them scramble brought a sharp sense of relief, even triumph. For so long, they had dictated my life without hesitation. Now they were the ones cornered, forced to answer for choices they had kept hidden. Watching their composure falter gave me a strength I hadn't known I needed. But as satisfying as it was, a heaviness settled in my chest. They were still the people who had raised me, even if their love had been conditional. Knowing I had set this in motion stirred a faint ache, a reminder that revenge, no matter how justified, came with its own weight. I wasn't proud of their suffering, but I couldn't ignore the necessity of what I had done. That mix of victory and remorse made me feel more grounded, reminding me I hadn't lost my sense of right and wrong. I wasn't acting out of cruelty, I was standing up for myself for the first time in my life. The fallout was immediate. Roderick's business partners grew wary, demanding explanations and auditing every transaction he had ever signed. Deals stalled, contracts were questioned, and whispers of financial mismanagement spread quickly. The empire he had built on intimidation and charm began unraveling before my eyes. Meanwhile, Janice had no choice but to step into the spotlight, offering explanations she hadn't prepared for, her carefully curated image cracking under scrutiny. I stayed in the background, careful not to reveal my hand. Quietly, I began reclaiming assets they had tried to conceal, documents proving ownership, small accounts, and personal items they had thought I wouldn't notice. Each discovery, each piece restored to me, felt like reclaiming a fragment of the life they had tried to control. Watching the chaos unfold, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: power. Not arrogance, not gloating, but the simple, steady satisfaction of being in control for once. For so long, I had been at their mercy, shaped by their decisions and abandoned when I needed them most. Now, every move they made in panic, every stumble in public, reminded me that I had taken the reins of my own life. It was intoxicating, but also grounding. I wasn't acting out of spite alone, I was reclaiming what had been denied to me, proving that even after betrayal and hardship, I could rise. The sense of power was quiet, patient, and undeniable, and for the first time, I understood what it meant to stand fully on my own, unshaken by the people who had once held all the control. I asked them to meet me at a quiet cafe, away from home and witnesses. When they arrived, Roderick's confident smile faltered slightly, and Janice's usual composure seemed strained. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Do you know what it feels like to be completely abandoned by the people you trusted most?" I asked, my voice steady but carrying the weight of years of pain. Roderick shifted uncomfortably. "Lark, it wasn't like that. You have to understand." "I do understand," I interrupted. "I understand that you lied, that you used me, that you thought your money and status could replace honesty or care. I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here so you feel, even for a moment, what it feels like to be powerless and betrayed." Janice's eyes flickered, searching mine for a hint of weakness. "You're overreacting. We provided for you. We gave you everything." I shook my head. "Providing for me isn't the same as respecting me. You treated me like an investment, like I was only worth what I could bring to your image or profit. That ends today." For a long moment, they tried to manipulate, to gaslight, to make me doubt myself. But I didn't flinch. Every word I had prepared, every truth I had uncovered, gave me armor. I could see their frustration, their inability to bend me anymore. When I finally left, it wasn't triumphant in a loud way, it was quiet, firm, and final. I wasn't the scared girl who relied on them. I was someone who had taken her life back, who had spoken her truth, and they had no power to undo it. After months of careful planning and hard work, I finally signed the papers for my own home. It was modest, but every corner reflected choices I had made for myself, no one dictating, no one controlling. The feeling of holding those keys, knowing this space was entirely mine, was unlike anything I had experienced before. With the home came the confidence to take the next step. I launched a small consulting business, drawing on the skills I had honed while navigating my parents' deception. Every client I gained, every project I completed, reinforced that I could create success on my own terms. The work was challenging, but it was mine, built from determination rather than inheritance. Tice became an indispensable partner in this phase, offering practical advice and encouragement, never pity. Shara continued to mentor me, helping me navigate complex decisions and reminding me to stay focused on strategy, not emotion. Together, they were a support system I had never had from family, people who respected my independence and cheered my progress. For the first time, I felt entirely self-reliant. No whispers of manipulation, no hidden agendas, no parental control, just my effort and my choices shaping the path ahead. Each morning, waking in my own space, managing my own business, I felt unshackled from the past. The freedom was empowering, a quiet triumph after years of feeling powerless. In reclaiming my life, I discovered strength, confidence, and the unshakable knowledge that I could survive and thrive entirely on my own. When the time was finally right, I gathered everything I had documented, records, statements, timelines, and presented it to the proper channels that handled public disclosures. I didn't exaggerate or twist anything, I simply laid out the truth as clearly as possible. Once the information was released, it spread quickly through the circles my parents once dominated with ease. Their polished reputation couldn't withstand the weight of facts that showed years of deceit and reckless dealings. People who had trusted them stepped back, shocked by how calculated their behavior had been. Investigators followed the trails I had uncovered, opening cases that forced Roderick and Janice to answer for the choices they had kept hidden. Invitations they used to receive without effort stopped arriving. Former allies distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the fallout. The consequences they faced were real, measured, and unavoidable. I didn't celebrate their humiliation. I didn't mock them or push for anything beyond accountability. My goal had never been to destroy them, it was to prevent them from continuing to harm others the way they had harmed me. By exposing the truth, I ensured that their influence could no longer be used to manipulate or control anyone else. Standing back and watching everything unfold, I felt a steady sense of closure. My actions had been deliberate and fair, rooted in facts rather than cruelty. The revenge I carried out wasn't driven by spite but by the need for justice and protection, for myself and for the people they might have exploited in the future. For the first time, I could breathe without the weight of their shadow. I had closed the circle not with bitterness, but with clarity and strength, proving to myself that I could rise without losing who I was. Sitting in the quiet of my new home, I let myself think about everything I had endured. The deception, the abandonment, the long nights of doubt and struggle, all of it had shaped me in ways I hadn't realized at first. I had been forced to confront my fears, test my limits, and rebuild my life from the ground up. Each challenge had strengthened me, teaching patience, strategy, and the value of trusting my own judgment. Looking back, I understood the depth of the betrayal, but I also saw how it had pushed me to grow beyond what I thought was possible. The pain had been intense, but it had revealed a resilience I didn't know I possessed. I had learned to stand firm, to act with intention, and to protect not just my future, but my sense of self. I smiled, realizing the truth that mattered most. I lost my parents' trust, but I found myself. And that was a kind of wealth no one could take, no matter how cunning or cruel. The lessons I had learned, the independence I had forged, and the strength I now carried were priceless. Now, when I think about the path ahead, I see opportunity, not fear. I am guided by experience, wisdom, and a sense of empowerment that comes from overcoming betrayal and reclaiming control. My story isn't just about revenge, it's about survival, growth, and the ability to rise stronger than circumstances or people who try to hold you back. I know now that no matter what challenges come, I can face them with clarity, courage, and hope.